We're going to be talking about that particular issue that emanates from our neighbors in Namibia. So Dr. Atilla Kisla, International Justice Cluster Lead at SALC, to get a further appreciation of the issue and some of the highlights of the cases that have since or the bills that have since been passed. Dr. Atilla, a good evening to you. Welcome to Duma FM.
Thanks so much. Sorry about the technical issues.
Not a problem. I think all is well that ends well. Now, Dr. Kisla, I've already laid the foundation for understanding what it is that has since happened in Namibia. And maybe let's look at the potential implications of passing the proposed amendments to the Marriage Act on the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary in Namibia. And that seems to be something that SALC has shown a lot of interest in, and perhaps we should delve into that from your point of view of why we should give this particular aspect serious thought.
Sure. Thanks so much. So as SALC, we are seriously concerned about the development by the introduction of the bill in Namibia, which actually was introduced with reference to Article 81 of the Namibian Constitution. So it is the bill states this, it is to contradict a decision by the Supreme Court of Namibia, and that decision is the Digasho judgment, where the court stated that excluding a spouse of a same-sex marriage from the interpretation of the term as a spouse under the Immigration Control Act constitutes a violation of the right to dignity and the right to equality under the Namibian Constitution. So as SALC, we are very concerned by this, as it constitutes a threat to the independence of the judiciary, to a threat to the separation of powers and to the rule of law. Because if this bill were to be enacted, it would reverse or go immediately against that decision by the Supreme Court, and it would create an imbalance between the separation of the powers, which is on the one side we have the legislature, and on the other side we have the judiciary. And the legislature would actually go immediately against that decision and might run the danger of becoming too powerful. And actually also in that regard, it is up to the judiciary to actually define the content of the constitutional protections under the Namibian Constitution. And the legislature, of course, has to conduct its decision lawmaking process within that framework of the Constitution. And in this case, the Constitution has made a ruling, has defined the scope and the content. In this case, it was Article 8 and Article 10, and the legislature openly goes against that decision.
Right. So within the context of a constitutional democracy that Namibia is founded on, not only are you concerned about the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary, but also the integrity and effectiveness of the legislative process in Namibia. So how does the rushed introduction and passage of the Civil Registration and Identification Bill, as well as the bill to amend the Marriage Act, affect these particular aspects, the integrity and effectiveness of the legislative process?
Quite severely, because rushing the legislation through Parliament in contradiction of the Supreme Court judgment under the guise of moral panic and misleading the people and deliberately misstating the scope of the judgment is quite concerning. And rushing legislation with respect to democratic principles is never a good sign, and it actually undermines can undermine democratic principles such as public participation in the lawmaking procedure. So we are quite concerned how quickly this bill was passed by the National Assembly, and given its direct contradiction to the Supreme Court judgment.
Right. And looking at the Supreme Court's ruling, maybe in the Degashu case and its recognition of the appellant's rights, what factors are driving the lawmakers' anxiety about potential future legal challenges? And are these concerns justified in your view?
I don't think they are justified. I think the lawmakers just play into the uncertainty raised by some groups in the country, and it is actually quite concerning that the introduction of the bill appears to be purely reactive and goes directly against that Supreme Court judgment, which defined the scope and content of constitutional rights. So it is quite concerning, and it seems like members, I don't know what their personal agenda is, but it seems like some members of parliament want to take advantage of the situation in the country.
Okay, now let's visit the Bill of Rights for a little bit now, and maybe elaborate on the risks posed to fundamental freedoms and rights protected under the Namibian Constitution if the proposed amendments to the Marriage Act are passed into law. So what are some of those risks? You've mentioned, I guess, one or two in passing, but let's just expand on what you said earlier.
Sure. So if this bill would pass and would be enacted into law, we think that this enacting such a bill in the way of Article 81 to contradict the direct decision of the Supreme Court of Namibia can set a very, very dangerous precedent, because while this case is while this case addresses Article 8 and Article 10 under the Namibian Constitution, which is the right to dignity and right to equality in this case, in a future case, we might up in a situation where the legislature is going against the decision by the Supreme Court of Namibia that was about other fundamental and constitutional rights, like, for instance, I'm just putting it out there, like right to fair trial or the protection of life, if the court has made a certain ruling on the content of those rights. And now if we would have a situation where the legislature, the parliament, could just go against that decision, regardless of the ruling by the Supreme Court, I think that would set a dangerous precedent. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, there is the danger of the legislature becoming too powerful. And the court, the Supreme Court of Namibia, actually addressed this or indicated this issue in its judgment, where it stated that whilst public opinion expressed by the legislature can be relevant, it is up for the judiciary and in this case the Supreme Court of Namibia to determine the content of constitutional rights. So the Supreme Court of Namibia is the last deciding instance about the content of the Constitution.
Right. Now, maybe my final question, and perhaps the crescendo of all that we've been talking about, in light of Article 63.1 and Article 63.2c of the Namibian Constitution, how do you interpret the National Assembly's power to make laws in relation to the court's duty to uphold and defend the Constitution, as well as protect fundamental rights? How should the balance between legislative powers and constitutional rights be maintained in this context?
So in this context, Article 63.1 and 63.2c, they set out the powers and functions of the National Assembly, the Parliament. So, and those provisions clearly set out that the powers and the function of the National Assembly is subject to this Constitution, and the National Assembly has further the function to consider to take steps to uphold and defend this Constitution. Now, in this case, we have the judgment by the Supreme Court already, which has defined what is part of the constitutional protection of the right to dignity and right to equality. And that has already, the judgment has been delivered, it is part of the constitutional protection. Now we have the National Assembly, which is clearly going against the constitutional protection. And we believe that Article 63 sets the limitations to the powers and function of the National Assembly, which in this context has to, of course, consider Supreme Court judgments by the Supreme Court of Namibia, and those are the limitations for the lawmaking procedure in that regard.
Right. Dr. Atilla Kisla, International Justice Cluster Lead at SALC, thank you for giving us those insights, and we do hope to get a hold of you in the future for other issues of this nature. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.